The Third Crusade really had everything. We're talking brilliant leaders, secret plots, religious fights, tough sieges, surprising moves, brave plans, and famous battles that completely changed history. In this video, we'll look at the battles of Hattin, Acre, Iconium, Jaffa, and Arsuf. Welcome to Alex Histoer's documentary on the Third Crusade. In late June of 1187, two armies were gathering under the hot sun in Galilee for a huge, important campaign. The first army was camped at a place called Sepphoris. It was a combined force from the Christian Crusader Kingdoms, led by Guy de Lusignan, the new king of Jerusalem. The best part of this Christian army was its 1,200 knights on horseback. These knights came from all the Crusader kingdoms and military groups like the Hospitallers and Templars. But even though these knights were great fighters, they had lost a battle to the Muslims at Crescent just 2 months before, which showed they could be beaten. About 4,000 other horsemen supported the main knights. These were a mix of soldiers, former Muslim prisoners, local helpers, and hired soldiers called Turcopole. They acted as the Crusaders' light cavalry, using bows and light spears. The army also had 15,000 foot soldiers, but they weren't all equally skilled. Some were professional crossbowmen from Italy, while others were just inexperienced local men. Their weapons were a messy mix too, including big Danish axes, maces, swords, pikes, and many others. About 20 kilometers east, Guy's enemy, Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, who most people know as the famous Saladin, moved his 35,000 men from Tala Ashtara to set up camp in the small village of Kafr Sabt. From this high ground, Saladin's army could easily attack the Crusaders if they tried to march to the Sea of Galilee, or to the cities of Tiberias and Sepphoris. Saladin's army had about 23,000 foot soldiers and 12,000 horsemen, and it was better organized than the Christian army. The army was divided into standard groups, and the regular soldiers were paid for their service. Most of the soldiers were Turcoman, Kurds, and Arabs, and a special group of Mamluks acted as the Sultan's personal bodyguards. The Muslim commander made the first move on July 1st. Saladin wanted to check out the Christian army for himself and maybe trick them into a fight. He rode close to Sepphoris with a unit of cavalry. His trick didn't work, but the Muslims were able to scout the Christian camp and a possible northern road to the sea. Saladin knew he had to try something else to make King Guy move, so he sent a large part of his foot soldiers and siege engines to attack Tiberias. This was a fortified town where Count Raymond of Tripoli's wife, at Chevaluberg, was staying. Sadly for the people there, most of Tiberias' soldiers had been sent away, leaving very few to defend it. After a short fight, a tower in the wall was brought down with a mine, and Tiberias was captured. Ichi and the last soldiers pulled back into the citadel, while a messenger, probably allowed to leave by Saladin, went to tell the main Christian army what had happened. Back to the west, the bad news from Tiberias made all the important Christian leaders meet for a war council. You might be surprised to hear that Count Raymond, even though his wife was in danger, strongly argued against trying to save the city. He believed Saladin's attack was a trap, meant to pull them into a bad situation and a battle that Saladin wanted. People called him a coward and a traitor because he had been friendly with Saladin before, but King Guy was convinced. The army stayed put, and the council ended for the night. But one of the men who had accused Raymond, the Grand Master of the Templars, Gerard de Riedfort, kept pressuring the king all night. His own army had recently been crushed at Crescent. We don't know what finally made the king change his mind. But just before the sun came up on July 3rd, 1187, the Crusaders were told they were about to march. Guy's army packed up their camp at sunrise and started their slow march east across the dusty, hot plains of Galilee. The army was set up in 3 parts, one behind the other. The cavalry was in the middle, protected by foot soldiers on the outside. Raymond led the front part, King Guy was in the center with the true cross, and Balian de Bayonne led the back. Soon after they left, Saladin heard that his enemy was moving. He immediately called most of his troops back from Tiberias, leaving just a small group to continue the siege. While the returning foot soldiers got organized, Saladin sent groups of fast-moving horse archers toward Guy's army. At about 10 a.m., the heavily armored Christian army reached an empty village called Turin. The village had a small spring, and a few soldiers got a drink, but most of the army was not allowed to stop and had to keep moving toward Tiberias. As the thirsty Crusader army left Turin, Saladin's light cavalry started attacking their slow-moving groups with arrows and javelins. It started with a few shots, but it turned into a heavy storm of arrows as the Crusaders passed in front of the main Muslim army at Kafr Sabt. At noon, the left side of Saladin's army, led by Gokburi, swept around the back of the Crusader army, cutting off their escape route to Turan. The Christians were now in a terrible spot. They were moving very slowly because of the constant attacks, and they were sweating in the summer heat with no water. Raymond, who was leading the front, realized the army was too weak to fight its way down the Lobia road, which was near Saladin's position. So he talked Guy into taking a northern road toward the springs at Hattin, 6 kilometers away. There, his men could rest, drink water, and recover. Watching this change of direction from his high position, the Sultan sent his lieutenant Taqiyuddin to block the road to Hattin with the right side of his army. Raymond tried to make his men move faster because he knew this could happen, but the attacks on Balian's rear guard by Gokburi's horsemen nearly stopped the army completely. When night came, the tired and discouraged Christians set up camp for what would be a very rough night. The thirsty, tired troops were attacked all through the night by fast-moving horse archers from every side. These attacks killed many men and, even worse, many of their unarmored horses. While Guy and the Crusaders were in a bad situation with few supplies, Saladin and his army had more than enough. Camels were a big reason his supply lines worked so well. To keep the arrow attacks going, he brought in 70 camels loaded with extra ammunition. At the same time, a steady line of camels carried water and goat skins from Lake Tiberias to the Muslim camp. King Guy's army got into its 3 marching groups before sunrise, and began the last march toward the fresh springs of Hattin. They would never get there. Saladin had ordered his men not to attack while the enemy was getting ready before dawn, but now he ordered them to light piles of dry bushes on fire. This sent dry, choking smoke from the northwestern hills right into the Christian soldiers. The terrible situation caused some knights to switch sides and join Saladin, telling him that their friends were done for. At this perfect moment, Saladin ordered the main part of his army in the center to charge down the hill and attack the enemy. As they charged, the Templar units at the back of the Christian army and Raymond's group at the front responded with a mounted countercharge. They crashed into the units, led by Gokburi and Taqiyuddin. This pushed back the first Muslim attack on the sides, and even created a small gap between Saladin and his right wing, but it cost the Crusaders many of their horses. But Guy's tired foot soldiers, who had no sleep, were very thirsty and were choking on the smoke, had reached their limit. When they saw the small gap that had opened between Saladin's and Taqiyuddin's groups, they took the chance and broke ranks, running toward Lake Tiberias. But because the Sultan's army was there, they were instead herded onto an old, 2-peaked volcano known as the Horns of Hattin. King Guy's group, which was under constant attack by Saladin's mounted soldiers, was forced to stop just southwest of the Horns. They tried to set up a defense with tents, but it was useless. A little to the east, Raymond took what was left of his frontline group and charged straight at Taqiyuddin's troops. To the Count's surprise, his enemy's quick units moved aside like an opening door and let the Christians march deeper into the valley behind them before closing ranks again. With his frontline troops now cut off from the battle by Taqi's smart move, Raymond kept going north and left Hattin completely. He went first to Lake Tiberias and then all the way back to Tyre. It was seen as an act of betrayal and cowardice, and even though his earlier advice had been smart, many people at the time would never let him forget it. As more and more Christian soldiers ran to the Horns hoping to be safe, their will to fight completely disappeared. When King Guy, who was still trying to set up his camp, ordered the foot soldiers to come back down, they refused. They said, "We are not coming down, because we're dying of thirst and we will not fight." With no other choice, the king also joined his men on top of the southern horn and set up his royal tent. At this point, Saladin's troops attacked the old volcano from all sides. Even though the Christians fought back hard, the attackers eventually managed to separate the Christian forces on each peak. When the Sultan's young son, Al-Afdal, saw this success, he shouted to his father, "We have conquered them!" Saladin immediately corrected him harshly, saying, "Be quiet, we will not have beaten them until that tent falls." It is said that the moment after he spoke, a Muslim horseman cut the tent's ropes and it fell down. The battle was won. Only a few of the top knights in Guy's army had even been hurt, but a huge number of foot soldiers and horses lay dead on the field. Except for the escape of Bayan de Bawan and a few Christian units from the back, Saladin's victory was complete. Almost every Christian warrior was either killed or taken prisoner. King Guy himself was simply captured and was treated fairly well. After this huge victory, Saladin started marching toward Jerusalem and began to lay siege to it on September 20th. Even though the city's defenses had been made stronger, Jerusalem was a city in trouble. It was filled with people who had fled from the countryside to escape the war, and it had very few fighting men left after the defeat at Hattin. The defenders, led by Valiant of Abelon, fought back bravely, but the city was hit hard by catapults and mangonels. After days of siege, the two sides started to talk about peace. As Saladin often did, he offered easy and even generous terms, which were agreed to on October 2nd. The surrender was finalized a few days later, and on October 9th, 1187, Saladin peacefully marched into the Holy City. After that siege, Saladin had taken most of the Crusader cities on the coast, including the important trading center of Acre. But the old city of Tyre held out against the Muslims. This happened when an Italian noble, Conrad of Montferrat, arrived from Constantinople and took command. Conrad of Montferrat, now in full control of Tyre, sent the Archbishop of Tyre, Goscius, to the west. He carried stories of the terrible Christian defeats to Pope Urban III. The Pope died on October 20th, 1187, and some say it was from the shock of hearing that Jerusalem had been lost. Soon after he died, Gregory VIII became the new Pope, and by the end of the month, the call for the Third Crusade was made. At this point, we need to stop and look at what was happening in Western Europe and how people reacted to the fall of Jerusalem. The growing fights between and inside the Western powers made the problem worse. The last crusade, the Second Crusade, had been a total failure, which made people doubt the idea of a holy war. In 1152, Frederick I Barbarossa had taken power in the Holy Roman Empire, and in 1155, he officially became the emperor. His empire was strong on paper, but its different areas were famous for not wanting to follow a central leader, and he had to spend decades stopping fights within the empire. To the west, the Counts of Anjou, who used to be under the French Capetian kings, started to become more powerful. The current ruler, Henry of Anjou, then added the Duchy of Normandy to his lands. In 1152, he married Eleanor of Aquitaine, who had been married to the French king Louis VII. Then, in 1154, he became the King of England. He ruled over an area that included parts of modern Britain and France, which historians call the Angevin Empire. The Angevins were technically under the French kings because of their lands on the continent, but they were often more powerful than the Capetians. This tension would affect the upcoming crusade. But Saladin's amazing victories in 1187 were enough to break the stalemate. As the Pope's call for a crusade spread through Europe's royal courts, tens of thousands of Latin Christians promised to join the cause. This created a huge change in European society, especially in France, where many nobles began to gather their own groups of soldiers. But for the crusade to be successful, the kings had to join in. This is where we meet one of our main Christian heroes, Richard, the prince who would later be known as the Lionheart. This young prince was at war with his own father, with the help of the new French king, Philip II Augustus. He was the first to join the crusade in November of 1187. It's important to know that the prince was known for being reckless and wanting to increase his own fame and importance. Richard's choice sent shockwaves across Western Europe and forced the Angevins and Capetians to do something. The Third Crusade